All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, one day we're going to strike it super rich and we're going to have all these people buzzing around to produce our podcast and
Oh
make
yeah.
sure our mics work and our headphones are connected and the lighting is perfect and all these other things. But for now, we're good. We're good
Yes.
with our backup headphones. How are
We
you
ha
doing?
yeah, other than being on a backup set of headphones and microphone here because of some randomness on the other one, I'm doing just fine. Although
hmm
it was funny this morning because I texted my brother and sister-in-law that apparently the president is now declaring that he is the president of Europe as well as the United States. Apparently, everyone calls him the president of Europe, which is, you know, a lie, obviously.
Of
But
course.
I was just like, welcome to the club.
Exactly. Welcome to the club. No, that sounds even worse than what I was looking at earlier, where he was saying that my governor here in Maryland, Wes Moore, they had a great conversation, and that I'm like, no, he's obliterating you right now. My governor is obliterating you right now. So please don't make it sound like everything is cool and copacetic because it's not. It is not. So, along with many other governors and mayors around here. So here we are. But
Yeah. Wes Moore's been doing
uh,
a good job. Didn't he respond to one of his
kicking
stupid tweets,
butt,
something like
kicking
president
butt.
owns Spurs or something? And
Oh,
then,
kicking butt.
yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
a governor has a long history in the military, right?
Yes, he does. He was a Marine. And what cracked me up when I was listening to something he mentioned, I didn't catch the whole thing, but I caught the end of it. And Governor Moore, was specifically saying something about no, you will not be deploying any National Guard to the city of Baltimore. I take that very seriously. I have served in the uniform of this country, and the only uniform that this president has served in is a Brooks Brothers suit.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, I screamed. I screamed and hollered because
Yeah, it's good.
I mean I, him and Gavin Newsom are just tearing it up
Oh,
right now.
Gavin
They're
Newsom
tearing
is,
it up.
I mean, fun. It's
Um,
fun. It's funny. It's funny.
well, Lisa, I have told you this both in my personal spaces and further beyond my personal spaces. Nothing gets at me than a bully. I'm sorry. I don't
Mm-hmm.
do bully. And so at times, unlike our beloved former FLOTUS, Michelle Obama, no, I will not go high when they go low. If you go low, my friend says all the time, it's funny, yet it's not funny. She said, "Girl, if they go low, I will go to hell. Okay, I will go lower than the lowest low because I believe in checking bullies." And I'm finding the shock and awe of especially certain Republicans. Yeah, they're in shock and awe and oh, this is so disrespectful simply by matching the same energy. I'm like, oh, it's okay for us to get beat up, but it's not okay for you all to get hit back in response.
Oh, right. Because, yeah, we're wrong and they're 100% right all the time, right?
All
Doesn't
the
there's,
time.
we could
All
get
the
ourselves a new
time.
little baseball cap that says Trump was right about everything. So that's a new little,
Oh, for
some new
sure.
merch,
So,
Shauna, that you might
uh,
want.
oh my gosh. Wait a minute. What really got me? So, I'm going to give y'all a little in because Lisa already knows that I took a little bit of a break over the weekend to get away for a little bit. I was on the Eastern Shore where it was beautiful, beautiful weather, infinity pools going out towards the Chop Tank River where Harriet Tubman crossed and all these other wonderful things, right? And there are four or five different pools, but it just happened to be that I'm sitting there eating and people watching. And there's a gentleman that gets into the large pool that has clearly the red and white hat on, right? And I checked because some people try to be funny, haha, like, made you look, I'm woke or
Yeah.
whatever, whatever it is, right? And so it was an actual red and white. Um, and other than his wife, to see all the people like completely
Oh, they
move
just
away from
dispersed.
them, they
Oh
just
my God.
in the pool. I mean, they got as far away from him as possible. I mean, it was so but because I couldn't hear anything that anybody was saying. I just visually saw people disperse to move away from him in this very large pool. And then when he got out, they went back to doing what they wanted to do, but they just repelled. They were repelled by the
That's
hat. I'm
funny.
like, yes, yes. So anyway, I know I might have been reading too much into that, but it just wasn't, you could tell it wasn't unintentional. It
Yeah.
was, no, people were quickly moving away. And I'm like, oh, they do not want to be affiliated with the foolishness. Go Maryland, go Maryland, go Maryland. Yes, yes. So anyway, we're all off topic already, y'all, but
Yeah.
that's fun stuff that we've been dealing with over the last little bit of time here. But let me get us into the word of the week because I think it's a very nice bow on the other phases that we have for today's episode. So let's dive in. So, our word of the week is public historian. And I have to say, Lisa and I, we have a good chuckle when we're kind of going through the production notes for each episode because oftentimes she says, okay, do you think this is worthy of definition? And I usually say, I just don't want to leave
Uh-huh.
anything to chance. I
Uh-huh.
don't want to make any assumptions. Even if people think they know what it is, do we all have a mutual understanding of what it is? And so I said, I look, I'm almost how can I say? I'm almost sold out on defining every single word in the freaking English language at this point because as much as there are really powerful words that do undergird our work, again, I don't want to assume that just because you've heard the word or phrase that you know how to apply it. So, public historian is our word for this week because public history is its own historical movement. When you talk to historians, I had a former boss that was a trained historian, and she talked a lot about public history being its own movement, specifically a resistance movement, because there's been a long, drawn out history, pun intended, long, drawn out history of keeping history from everyone, almost like information hoarding at work, if you will. And so, well, this group knows this information, but the rest of these groups do not. And so, those that do build their careers upon being public historians feel very strongly that knowledge is a public and human right. So it emphasizes that there is a participatory approach to building history based on our collective experiences, but also it intentionally involves communities, individuals in the history making process. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about on this episode really make people think and rethink the bad taste in our mouth in regard to quote unquote revisionist history, knowing that as we learn more, history grows. And develops because we're filling in empty spots that we didn't even know existed. And so, this collaborative approach to public history is indeed resistant because, again, there are factions of individuals that don't want other factions of individuals to have access to certain information. So, with that, I just want to kind of remind people that history is super important. But as someone who read, what was his books? Lowen's book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, that was a life-changing book for me because it now always reminds me of, yes, what information is fed to me, but also what information is kept from me, and to make sure that I'm always looking for it. So,
Mm-hmm.
with that, be aware of public historians and their work, public history, what's made public and easy for you to access versus things that are not.
Mm-hmm.
Crucial to our work here. So Lisa, I know we talk about this all the time. What's being taught in schools these days, and what are the kids learning, and da da da. And oftentimes, I wish you all could just sit in on some of the production conversations that Lisa and I have because there are some things, for example, with your education and upbringing in the UK that you knew at a certain time period that, frankly, I was in post-secondary before I was even aware that it existed. And so that's quite telling in hindsight, in retrospect. And I have no problem saying I didn't know what I didn't know. But it is quite telling when you compare that to probably how you were educated, Lisa, and things that you knew about my own country in yours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my education excluded that whole, colonization period.
Of course. Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, didn't really learn much about that until college, or even then. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
good. I think this public history is perfect to lead us into our first phase here. Okay, so I felt like we had to talk about the Smithsonian.
For sure. For sure.
Just
For
a
sure.
little recap for folks. On August 12th, the president sent a letter to the Smithsonian, to the president, executive director of the Smithsonian, that demanded that its exhibits reflect the unity, progress, and enduring values that define the American story, and essentially mandated that there would be a review. Now, the person who's doing this review, I think, like, has no historian background. I think it's just some random sycophant that doesn't understand how we understand history, display history, teach about history, etc. Right? So that happened on August 12th. And then a few weeks later, a preliminary list, I am presuming it is not going to be the totality of the list, was released of 20 exhibits or displays that this individual had reviewed and felt like they were displays that were putting forth an ideological position versus narratives that are based in quote unquote factual evidence. So I'll just pause there and do a little asterisk, right? So the argument of the Trump administration is that any history that doesn't glorify, celebrate, or talk about the successes and the joy of being an American and the American history and American achievement, etc. We had talked a little bit about this with the national parks and the national historic sites a few weeks ago. Therefore, that any presentation that doesn't do that is an ideological bent, is radical, is woke, is not based in any kind of fact, right? Which the underlying premise there is that to remove that would be to de-ideologicalize, that's not a word at all, history, right? As though the Trump administration itself doesn't have an ideology, right? Its ideology is to whitewash history, to remove difficult parts of US history that people find a struggle to understand and believe and kind of align with, right? So that is still an ideological position, right? And part of the problem in US history broadly is, to your point with the public historian definition, is that tons and tons of US history had been excluded, was not in textbooks, was not taught in schools, and it was just one version of history that was predominantly white and male. And so there was this whole array or rainbow of historical experiences that were just excluded and erased, right? So that is kind of the backwards tracking that is happening. So anyway, the list of these 20 items are shockingly only about African Americans' experience in the United States, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people's experience in the United States, or women's experiences in the United States, right? Or other marginalized groups. So I'm going to read you a couple here, and then I want to get your reaction. So one example, the National Museum of African Art displayed an exhibit on quote, works of speculative fiction that brings to life an immersive, feminist, and sacred aquatopia inspired by the legend of, I don't know how to pronounce this, Drexia, an underwater kingdom populated by the children of pregnant women who had been thrown overboard or jumped into the ocean during the Middle Passage. A second example, the American History Museum's LGBTQ+ history exhibit seeks to understand evolving and overlapping identities such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, transsexual, transvestite, mahu, homosexual, fluid, invert, earning, third sex, two sex. There's a whole long list there. I won't read it all, but is intended to understand their experience in the United States, historically traced, and how those identities intersect. And then one last one here. The National Portrait Gallery commissioned a stop motion drawing animation that examines the career of Anthony Fauci. So that apparently is not based in fact. The man's life story. Anyway, there's more, and we will include a link to the list in show notes. But I will say that this list was published on kind of a White House letterhead Oh,
Of
and I'm
course.
forgetting the name of it now. It was, I think I might have it open here. Hang on, let me see.
Mm-hmm.
Here we
Mm-hmm.
go. The name of this: President Trump is right about the Smithsonian. And then the list of 20 things that, in his estimation, are revisionist, are woke, are ideologically driven, are partisan, are not quote unquote real history. So there you go. I'm just going to wind you up here.
Well, I
Let you go.
know, I know, I know, I know. Well, and this white centered notion, white male straight notion of what's what's factual, what's not, what's ideological, and what's not from their particular point of view. I'm going to keep saying it forever and ever and ever. Definitely to the discomfort of these individuals. Nothing will be displayed that's uncomfortable for these individuals.
Mm-hmm.
I oftentimes, and I know this is not a word either, Lisa, but sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about Americanized toxic positivity where we're only going to talk about what's positive?
Right.
Because let me be very clear, the majority of specifically African American lives in this country has not been positive.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that if it's not positive, then it doesn't get discussed based on this parameter. Unreal. And so, with that, I think we've talked about this before, Lisa, when we talk about the various levels of rollout when it comes to fascism, and much of it is filtering out what we do not want folks to know.
Right.
And so, given that, I think that's what's completely driving what we do is that it's not comfortable for certain people. And specifically, it's usually white, male, straight, so-called Christian individuals. And so, with that, what I think is happening here too is that, again, it is what makes him uncomfortable. It
Mm-hmm.
makes those who think similarly to him uncomfortable. And what's going to be the challenge is we know how this happens. It will be quick and easy to get rid of these particular things. And at the same time, it will probably take decades to put them back. Why? Because it took decades to put them there
Right.
in the first place.
Right.
And so with that, and he knows that. He knows that it's difficult to build and quick to demolish. And that's how that's going to go. And so, with that, again, I still think that this man is even further outside of his mind. Every time he makes a decision, I feel like he is further outside of his mind. And at the same time, the yes people that are okay with this because it doesn't take away from their identity. It doesn't take
Mm-hmm.
away from their identity. They don't see, they see more of themselves when all of this stuff is moved out of the way. They see more of themselves, not less. Even the even the raggedy excuse of, well, we don't want to talk about this stuff because it makes young white kids uncomfortable. I'm like, yeah, but the rest of the world is uncomfortable all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you mean to tell me that your kid that's sitting in fourth period social studies is asked to be uncomfortable for an hour and that's a problem? What's going to end up happening is that they're going to grow up and hopefully be very bitter white people that are pissed off at you because you did not give them fuller information about the history of this country. Because that has been the lion's share of people that I run in circles with who happen to be white, white and male, or white and female, that are very pissed off that they
Mm-hmm.
didn't even get a chance to be offended by it. They didn't even get a chance to grapple with it. They didn't even get a chance to
Right.
let their minds wrap around things. And they feel like, oh my God, I'm a 30, 40, 50-year-old oblivious white person. And yes, a lot of it is by choice, but a lot of it is by design. Just like you and I were talking about before, Lisa, certain aspects of my history as an African American was not built into the K through 12 American educational system. So ding, ding, ding. Guess what, y'all? If I'm a fifth grader sitting in a classroom as a black girl and a white boy is sitting next to me in the same classroom where they're not teaching either one of us this information, we're both at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Now, I have a better chance of running into this information at home or in the circles of my culture, but both of us are ass out when it comes to the public knowledge and the public history that we all should know, but systems have designed it in such a way that we have less and less access to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Problematic. We're both at a disadvantage at this point.
Yeah, and it's really ridiculous that it's not understood that way, or maybe it is and they just don't care, right? And so you've got the Smithsonian, that set of museums, including the zoo, and they're all free, right? So we're trying to create as full a picture as possible of US history and the achievements of everyone, because up until a certain point, only white men were largely, their achievements were the only ones documented, right?
Yeah.
And now, so that, so how do you safeguard that? And I know that there are historians across all different disciplines that are trying to, maintain documentation and ensure that people still have access to this material. But I really like the way you said that essentially, I forget how you phrased it, but white people see more of themselves when this material, so white people, straight people, Christian people see more of themselves when the view of US history is narrowed to just their experiences, as though that is somehow neutral, right? And it's just as nonsensical as enforcing civil rights laws to protect white people, when that's not ever what civil rights laws were about, right? So it's completely turning everything on its head. We're in the upside down. And then Trump also tweeted or bleated. There's a guy I listen to, Tim Miller from the Bulwark. He always refers to Trump's tweets as bleats, and I kind of love that. So Trump bleated that the Smithsonian is out of control, all caps, where everything discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was, and how unaccomplished the downtrodden have been. Nothing about success, nothing about brightness with a capital B, nothing about the future with a capital F. So that was, and you're like, okay, well, part of the problem was that slavery was really fucking bad. And up until fairly recently, the degree of that badness was never fully understood by a large percentage of people in the United States, right? So like, that's a problem. If you don't understand your history, then you are doomed to repeat it, right? So I find this to be very chilling. I'm very nervous about it because I think this is just going to continue, and how much these individual museums are going to be able to resist, because the instruction is that they have 120 days now to remove or change. And it's like this the Civil War, right? I was just talking with someone earlier today who grew up in Florida in the 80s, and she said at that point Florida was a blue state, and she was not taught that the Civil War was about slavery. She was taught that it was about cotton and the economy and economics. She didn't understand that it was about slavery, right, until she went to California and in high school. So she did high school in California, and that's where she learned it. But this is the quote unquote framing, right? So to frame the Civil War as slavery in Trump's view and his cronies would be an ideological, woke, partisan narrative. But to frame it as about cotton and about the economy is perfectly neutral and normal, right? Nothing ideological about that, nothing to see here. But but that is factually inaccurate, right? So
yep, exactly. And so so this is a hopeful, I hope that we come back to this episode sometime in the future and we can all say, yay, we did it. So the Library of Congress has a publication from 1941 that is almost an encyclopedia, if you will. It's close to 400 pages and pretty small open source books where literal enslaved people were interviewed. And this was chronicled and documented, and it lives in the Library of Congress. I feel like all us Black folks need to run in there and go get those books and save them from their destiny, because frankly, he is not to be trusted, right?
No.
And so with that, it's open source. Thank goodness. Thank goodness for technology. They have hard copies of it, but they also have open source where you can read it right now. Matter of fact, I'll put the link in the show notes for that. It's called Slave Narratives, actually, and then it gives a number of different stories, interviews, questions, so forth, by those individuals. So fast forward, Lisa, that's exactly where I am. I just responded to a grant. This was, I want to say 3 weeks ago now, where the grant is to use multimedia in order to resist from a social justice standpoint, whatever that resistance looks like. It can be a mural over, a mural over a building, or it can be someone's art exhibit, or it could literally be any type of multimedia. And that those slave narratives is the model of that is exactly what I wanted to do for people like you and I, Lisa, who do this work during an
Right.
extremely difficult time where we can chronicle those voices of not
Oh,
only are
right.
we personally
Right.
interested, but we are professionally interested in making sure this work moves forward in some of the
Hmm.
darkest of times for our work and chronicling that because I don't want folks to look back 2, 3, 400 years from now and look back and say, why didn't anybody do anything?
Yeah.
No, no, we have voices of people who did. We have
Yeah.
voices of people who were, quote unquote, on the right side of history, on the accurate, more accurate side of history, but they got stamped out by propaganda and by people who are actively trying to silence those. I don't even want to say silence those voices. They actively want to act as if those voices never gave voice.
Right.
Like we were, Lisa, we were never here. That's
Yeah.
what they want
Never
it to
here.
look like in a few
Hmm.
hundred years. And that to me is concerning. So fingers and toes crossed that that worked out. But I'm just giving you an example of what can people do to resist the erasure, because we've been talking about this for a long time, Lisa, that the active erasure of
Yeah.
identities that are not white, male, cisgender, straight, and whatever form of Christian they want to claim.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's got to be an active process because they are actively erasing, so we have to actively write it back. It reminds me very much of, I forget what city it was in, but it was some quote unquote graffiti that was on a wall as a mural, and it was being painted over one day, and nightfall, sun rose the next day, and they kept painting it back and painting it back and
Okay.
painting it back. And I feel like that's the process that we're in with our history now is
Yeah.
we have to paint it back, keep painting it back.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that little piece about the resistance there is a good segue into phase
Mm,
two. So why don't you bring us up to speed on what's been
yeah,
happening?
yeah. Well, usually we don't pick the word of the week with intention, but this week we did. Just because, y'all, I know I stay on Instagram a lot. Like, I'm afraid to even look at how many hours I spend looking at things on Instagram, but I promise you, I'm not treating it as entertainment and totally as a toy. I am doing certain things and looking around at public opinion on certain things that are important to me in my work. But let me share with you two public historians that I really would love for folks to follow because they are refreshing. Let me put it that way. Usually, we spend a lot of time uh, really obliterating white men and all of the privilege that they carry every single day, and even what they should do, could do in order to continue to help to redistribute power dynamics in this country. Well, I will tell you that Tad Stoermer and Loki Mulholland, they are workhorses when it comes to this in ways that I don't see any average or prolific white man carrying, if you will. They both would consider themselves public historians. And let me share with you who Tad Stoermer is. Run out right now and follow him wherever. He's got like 300,000 followers on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Substack. Tad considers himself a public historian, a teacher, professor, has a dual appointment at University of Southern Denmark, the Center for American Studies there, as well as here at Johns Hopkins University here in the Baltimore area. And he has this forthcoming book called A Resistance History of the United States. And the reason why the book hasn't even come out yet, y'all, I'm waiting for the pre-order to drop right now for real because every day, this gentleman takes 5 minutes or less to school us all on how resistance could show up, but it doesn't. How resistance has worked in other countries and how it could work differently in the United States. And so I originally found him when I caught a little snippet. Lisa, it is so ironic that you brought up Civil War stuff with your friend and being taught different things in different states. That's exactly what he was talking about in that first post that I found, in that resistance. He talked about resistance requiring accountability. And we can't expect fully accountability right now in the resistance movement of civil rights in this country unless we go all the way back to when accountability was completely ignored and completely stepped over. So, Civil War. You mean to tell me that those that did not win the Civil War were not held accountable for the inhumane treatment of individuals who happen to look like me? And therefore, because there was no accountability, there has been no expectation of accountability moving forward as they express their opinions, as people incite violence, and as people literally continue to institutionalize the suppression of particular groups, but especially my group, since we're talking about that right now. When there's no accountability, it continues. And he talked about that in his post in particular. Um, and so with that, that was the first post that I found. And then Lisa, girl, I went on a daggone rabbit trail on all of it because I was watching like 3 months back of all these things that he had dropped about particular nuggets in regards to resistance, all the way back to the No Kings protest. I mean, further back than that. I mean, goodness. So really had some good stuff there. And then let me get into Loki Mulholland. Okay. Hopefully, our listeners are familiar with the freedom rides that really helped to highlight the civil rights movement. In fact, many of the folks that were part of the freedom rides map, if you look at the map, it went all over the place on the East Coast, Deep South, etc. Many of the folks that were a part of the freedom rides actually did not get to participate and hear Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech because many of them were sitting in jail. So, Dr. James Farmer, who my multicultural center was named after many years ago, he was the chief architect of the freedom rides, but he didn't get to hear, the go to the March on Washington or hear any of that because he was in prison at the time. Bayard Rustin was there, but was fully aware of all of this work. And so Joan Trumpauer Mulholland was one of the young white individuals that rode on those buses for the Freedom Ride with young Black people. And Loki Mulholland is Joan's son. He is a Emmy-winning filmmaker. He actually had the book and the film Get Back to the Counter, Seven Lessons from Civil Rights icon, his mother. And so he talked about that and kind of crystallized some of those stories, which is just profound, especially when you have a elderly parent that you want to capture some of their lived experiences, which is really important. And he has continued to push the envelope with educating people about these stories. When I first found out about Loki, I had known about Miss Joan because I'd seen her in photos. I had read about her and Dr. Farmer and so forth in my studies, but I didn't know she had a son. Okay. So when I found out she had a son, ironically, I have cousins who are members of the historically Black fraternity, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And I saw my cousin in a photo and he was standing beside
Mm.
Loki. And of course, as a Black person, now white people are not banned from historically Black fraternities and sororities. So please don't run down the street saying that I said that. No, no one's banned from fraternities and sororities. But when you see someone that is non-Black in a photo
Right.
with particular Greek letters on, your eye does stop and say, okay, who is this? I need to know who this is.
Yeah.
So Loki was one of the first members of Omega Sci-Fi's Utah chapter. He's won 20 Best Documentary Awards. I first discovered him when he was talking about the famous or infamous Lumpkins Farm, which is one of the most notorious jails for enslaved people that actually, I believe it's actually on the campus of what is now Virginia Union University. It literally was called the Devil's Farm, partially
Okay.
because of how horrific, I mean, literal breeding of Black people.
Oh my God.
There were a few videos that he showed where there were actual this is gruesome, but the way a guillotine looks, where you put your head through a slot,
Yeah.
it's not a guillotine, but it's you. The woman put her head through a slot so that she could be bred with another slave. And the whole purpose of that was so that she could not see who she was breeding with, because it could have been your brother,
Oh
father,
my
cousin,
God.
whomever, to breed more enslaved kiddos, right? So he shared some of that history. And I've been past Lumpkin's farm a bazillion times. I'm a native Virginian and spent a lot of time in the Richmond area. So, given that, all of this to say, I really feel strongly that, of course, follow African American historians, of course,
Hmm.
and at the same time, don't completely obliterate the notion that other non-Black people are doing great work. This is two of a very few, and I would
Hmm.
encourage you to go, especially for those of us that are interested in sound scholarship. These people are not writing fiction narratives somewhere in an office. They are doing the research, doing the homework. So Tad and Loki, they are incredible. And I would suggest, Lisa, that we probably need to just keep building a list of really great people that are doing this type of work and hold on to it, for people to continue to have that history in front of them in palatable ways. Can't always
Yeah,
read a 400-page book.
no, no, I mean, and people's attention spans are so limited these days. This you have to find a way to
You
kind of
have
break through,
to.
right? And because
Yes.
there's just such a high volume of disquieting information,
Hmm.
how do you kind of get information to people that sticks? Um,
Hmm.
the when you were talking, it made me think of one of my favorite kind of current authors and commentators around autocracy is a woman named Anne Applebaum. She's written some books and she writes for the Atlantic. But so I follow her on Substack, and she posted yesterday. She said, I just managed to mangle the quote, the arc of history bends towards justice, live on MSNBC. Um, and then she was like, I was quoting Governor Pritzker, but I did really like what he said next. It doesn't bend on its own, right? And so when I'm hearing you talk about these two white guys who are finding ways to resist and educate and make sure that people are aware of how history is, how experiences in history are being represented in current day, I see them as bending that arc, right? In the same way that so many other people who are finding ways to resist, of all racial identities, of all abilities, of all sexual orientations and genders. And I think that's just a good reminder, because we often go back to that quote, right? Or, we all have some version of it. I know we've said it on this podcast, but this idea that it just bends, we bend towards justice just like on its own, like it just happens organically, right? And so if
Nah.
that's really where we want, if we really want to push our way through this autocratic authoritarian moment towards a more just world, or we have to push on that arc. Like it's not going to bend without us putting our weight on it, right?
Oh my God, yes, 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 yes. You're reminding me of that. I know you've seen this before, where it's like the gas handle, where it's the little person pulling the gas handle back with all their might. Yeah, it doesn't bend on its own, and it doesn't bend easily.
And so was it Martin Luther King who said that? Was it someone else, and Martin Luther King was quoting that original
Oh,
quote?
that's a good question. I've looked that up before, but my memory.
Because it's longer, right? I think the piece we just remember is the bending towards, and I'm not even sure if that it doesn't bend on its own as part of the original quote or not.
Well, here's the thing. I know for the statue of Dr. King that was built here in DC, it was this huge uproar because they got it wrong. Like
Oh, really?
they didn't get the quote accurate, and they wanted to correct it on the side, but so it was Dr. King said it, but Dr. King quoted a lot of people. People just attribute it to him. But Theodore Parker was he was Unitarian. He was Unitarian Christian abolitionist. And way, way, way back in the 1800s, he said, I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one, but I can divine it by conscience. But from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice, right? So Theodore Parker originally said it, but then Dr. King quoted it, which makes complete sense because Dr. King was a heavyweight when it came to systematic theology, and Theodore Parker, being a white abolitionist, saying this would make complete sense.
So did Dr. King add the it doesn't bend on its own piece, or is that a more contemporary edition?
That isn't in his original quote
Okay.
of Reverend Parker. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, so I think that I just think it's a good
Mhm.
reminder as you kind of share these two people with us, and it is going to take all of it. It's going to take a lot of
Mhm.
people, right? It can't
Mhm.
just be folks who have experienced oppression. And to your point around,
Mhm.
like you're tired, you've done your part, right? Because you've been working hard on this issue for a long time, particularly Black women writ large. And so, right, the
Mhm.
weight has to come from a diversity of people,
Mhm. Mhm.
including white dudes,
In us, and I would say especially including white
especially.
dudes. It's like
Mm-hmm.
how does the folks that benefit the most from oppression don't get to say anything?
Yeah, yeah, fair. Yeah.
Nah, that's not how this works.
Well, and they also just they have more weight in our culture. So, them leaning on that arc is going to push it in further than you and I could push it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. Based on where we are. And I know
Yeah,
there would be some resistance to that. Well, why does it have to be? I mean, everybody can speak to. I'm like, yeah, everybody can and should speak towards justice, but those that will literally move the needle, move the arc more quickly with less effort, they have the
yeah,
leverage to do that based on privilege.
yeah. So
Mhm.
if that's just a little bit of a rallying cry, I guess, to add on to your
Yes.
resistance is important. It's coming in multiple ways. There are people that it's coming from that you might not expect it. And let's all lean into it. I'm not quoting Sheryl Sandberg there, but rather let's lend our weight to that.
Yes, because we have
Yeah,
mixed feelings about her
yeah,
too. So let's
yeah,
let's not even go there.
right.
Another podcast. Another
Yeah,
podcast. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's crucial. And so, I think we rightfully obliterate people that hang out in their privilege and use it to their advantage. I also want to be fair around highlighting those who do. Now,
mm-hmm.
this is not to say, y'all, I want to give a little bit of an asterisk caveat here. Lisa and I are not applauding fish that swim. Okay, we're not
Right,
saying yay for something you should do anyway. We're simply pointing out how rare it is that for someone to
mm-hmm.
do the right thing is such an oddity when it should not be an oddity.
Right, right.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah,
So,
don't be
mhm.
applauding fish that swim. Yeah, if a dad parents, don't be giving them a pat on the back. Right.
Hello, no babysitting. That's
Yeah,
another episode.
yeah. But anyway, okay, I think that's a good place to end
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
for this week.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you all for hanging in there with us on public history, public historians. This is a wrap on today's podcast. So certainly remember that you can reach out to us on all of our social media and podcast apps at Unfazed Unedited. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com or visit our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access new and old shows. So, if you like this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share it with your friends, coworkers, or historians.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
historians in this phase of your life. So, you all, until next time.
All right. See you next week.